Seraphina Voss was 23 years old, and she had learned, very early, how to disappear. Not literally. She was still there every morning, moving through the packhouse corridors with her head low and her steps quiet, carrying water or linens, or trays of food that other wolves ate without thanking her. She was there. She was always there. But there is a particular skill that certain people develop when the world makes it clear they are not welcome in it. The skill of becoming background, of folding yourself so small that you stop registering as something worth noticing. Seraphina had mastered it. She was the only Omega in Ironvale pack. There had been others, once, but they had left or bonded out or simply faded from the record, the way small things do. Now there was only her, and most days the wolves of Ironvale treated her the way people treat furniture they have stopped seeing. She was useful. She was present. She did not require acknowledgement. She had a small room at the back of the packhouse, near the water line. She kept it clean. She kept it empty. She had learned that possessions were just things to lose. Her mother had died when Seraphina was 4. Her father, a quiet beta named Aldrich, had raised her with a kind of helpless love, the love of a man who could see that his daughter was carrying something heavy, but could not name what it was. He died when she was 16. After that, there was only the packhouse, and the work, and the long practice of making herself small. She was good at it. She was very, very good at it. And then the king came. Kaelan Dravith arrived on a Thursday in October, when the trees in Ironvale had gone gold and red, and the air had that clean, cold edge that comes before the first frost. He came with 6 of his wolves and no announcement, which was his style. Surprise visits? His beta Marcus had explained to the pack leader 3 days before the actual arrival. The king prefers honest conditions. What this meant, in practice, was that Ironvale scrambled. Floors were scrubbed, reports were updated. The best food was pulled from storage. Everyone who ranked above Omega put on their best version of themselves and stood a little straighter. Seraphina cooked for 3 days without sleeping much. She did not put on a better version of herself, because no one was going to look at her anyway. The king was everything the stories said, and nothing like what she had imagined. He was tall, with dark hair, and the kind of face that looks like it was designed specifically to make other people feel uncertain about themselves. He was not loud. He did not need to be. When he walked into a room, the room reorganized itself around him, the way water moves around a stone dropped into it, not because the stone demanded it, but because that was simply the law of things. He sat at the head of the great hall table and reviewed Ironvale's reports with the focused silence of a man who reads between lines for a living. Seraphina carried a tray of goblets into the great hall on the second evening and did not see the edge of the chair that someone had pushed back from the table. Her foot caught it. The tray tilted. 6 goblets and a full pitcher of dark wine went everywhere, across the stone floor, across the hem of her dress, and in a wide, deeply dramatic arc across the shoes of one of the king's wolves. The sound was extraordinary. It rang through the hall like a judgment. The silence after it was worse. Seraphina crouched and began picking up goblets. Her hands were steady. She had learned, a long time ago, to keep her hands steady. She felt the king look at her. She did not look back. Then she heard it, a short, quiet sound, not mean, not sharp, just absent, the way someone exhales a small laugh at something barely worth the effort of a real reaction. An Omega, he said to Marcus, somewhere above her. They kept an Omega, that was all. Then he turned back to his documents. Seraphina finished picking up the goblets. She wiped the floor. She left the room. In the corridor outside, she stood very still for a moment and breathed. The back of her neck felt warm in the particular way it does when you have just been found small and found not worth the trouble of cruelty. Then she picked up her tray and went back to the kitchen. She did not think about it again. Or rather, she thought about it exactly as much as she allowed herself to think about anything that hurt, which was once, thoroughly, and then never. 3 weeks after the king's visit, something began to change. Seraphina noticed it first in small ways. A strange feeling in the soles of her feet when she walked the eastern grounds, like the earth was trying to tell her something through the language of pressure and vibration. The dry well behind the eastern woods, which had been unused for years, began to feel wrong when she passed it. Not dangerous exactly, but imbalanced, like a word missing from a sentence. At night she dreamed of roots. In the mornings she woke feeling like something inside her was expanding, very slowly, into space it had never been allowed to occupy before. She told no one. Who would she have told? The pack began to fracture around the same time, though not in ways that anyone connected to her. Two of Ironvale's ranking alphas entered a dominance dispute over territory boundaries that should have resolved within a week. It did not resolve. It stretched on, getting louder and more dangerous, pulling other wolves into its orbit. 3 pups born in late October came into the world too quietly and spent their first days in the care of the pack healer, with everyone pretending not to be frightened. The eastern fence collapsed without warning, on a dry morning, taking 12 feet of boundary line into the earth, as if the ground had simply swallowed it. The pack healer reported to the pack leader that she could feel something wrong with the territory, but could not name it. The pack leader filed a report to the king's office. The king returned in November. FPB. He walked Ironvale's grounds for 4 days with Marcus and 2 trackers, looking for the source of the instability. He interviewed ranking wolves, he reviewed the land surveys, he checked the pack's spiritual records, which were kept in a thick leather ledger that smelled of old paper and something faintly herbal. He found nothing, or rather, he found symptoms without a cause, which for a man like Kalen Draveth was its own kind of torture. On the 5th day, at dusk, he stood in the ruined eastern field and looked at the collapsed fence line and felt, for the first time in 11 years of ruling six-packs, like something was beyond him. He heard footsteps. Seraphina came around the far corner of the path, carrying a water bucket from the secondary well, because the eastern path was still blocked, and the long way around was the only way. She did not see him until she was 3 feet away. She stopped. He looked at her. Something happened that he would spend a long time afterward trying to explain, and eventually stop trying. The tension in the field, the particular grinding wrongness that had been vibrating at the edge of his awareness for 5 days, exhaled. Just slightly, just enough to notice. A bird began to sing somewhere in the trees to the east. He had not heard birds in this part of the territory since he arrived. "You," he said. She said nothing. She adjusted the bucket on her hip and waited, the way someone waits for a car to pass before crossing the street. "What did you just do?" "I carried water, my king." He looked at her for a long moment. She held his gaze this time, which surprised him. She did not look defiant. She did not look afraid. She looked like someone who has decided, very quietly and without making a performance of it, that she is done pretending to be smaller than she is. She walked past him. He stood in the field for a long time after she was gone. The archivist's name was Thessaly, and she had been cataloging bloodlines for 4 kings. When Kalen placed the blood sample results in front of her the next morning, she went through 3 distinct expressions in approximately 4 seconds: surprise, recognition, and something that looked almost like reverence, before she set down her pen. "Where did you find this?" she asked. "The Omega," he said. "Seraphina Voss." Thessaly was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "My king, I need you to understand that what I am about to tell you may be the most important thing you hear in your entire reign." She explained the anchor lineage. She explained it carefully, the way you explain something to someone you need to actually understand it, not just hear it. Anchors were not dominant wolves. They were not fighters, not leaders in the visible sense, not gifted with the powers the werewolf world had decided were worth having. What they carried was older than ranking, older than pack structure. It was territorial stability, the ability to hold the psychic and physical landscape of a pack territory together, at a level so fundamental that most wolves lived their entire lives on top of it, without knowing it existed. The last anchor had lived 400 years ago. She had ended a war by standing in the middle of a battlefield, not by fighting, not by commanding, by standing there and refusing to leave, and the wolves on both sides had found, gradually, that the rage that had been sustaining them for 6 years had become very difficult to locate. The territory stabilizes when the anchor is present and permitted to exist freely, Thessaly said, but anchors are sensitive to suppression. They cannot simply be diminished. Their power does not disappear. It compresses, and compressed anchor energy fractures the land, Kalen said. Thessaly nodded. He walked out of her study without another word. He walked the full length of the packhouse. He stopped outside the kitchen door. He could hear Seraphina inside, moving. The quiet, efficient sounds of someone who has spent years making themselves useful in a space that does not belong to them. He stood there for a long time, long enough that Marcus, coming to find him, stopped at the end of the corridor and silently turned around. He called the summit 3 weeks later. All 6-pack alphas, neutral ground, no explanation given. Attendance mandatory. 22 alphas arrived over 3 days. They came with their own betas and trackers, filling the treaty field with exactly the kind of energy that gathers when powerful people are put in a room together without knowing why. Competitive, watchful, performing. Kalen stood at the head of the field. Beside him stood Seraphina Voss, in the plain gray clothes she had traveled in, her hair down, her hands still at her sides. No one knew who she was. Several wolves exchanged glances. Rowan Ashfeld of the Northern Reach, the largest and loudest of the 6 alphas, looked at her the way Kalen had looked at her in the Great Hall 2 months ago. Not cruel, just absent. He did not laugh, but the corner of his mouth moved in a way that said the same thing. "She is going to walk the perimeter of this field," Kalen said. "You will observe." Seraphina walked the perimeter. She did nothing visible. She did not perform. She did not channel power or speak words or gesture toward anything. She walked with the same steady, unhurried pace she used to carry water through blocked corridors and scrub floors at midnight and move through spaces that had never been arranged with her in mind. She completed the circuit and came to stand in the center of the field. The talking stopped. It did not stop because anyone silenced it. It stopped the way a headache stops. You notice it is gone only a moment after it happens, and then you cannot quite remember what it felt like to have it. The constant low-level work of dominance, the weight of rank, the tiredness of always calculating where you stood and who stood above you and what that cost, went quiet. Not absent, quiet. The way a noisy room goes quiet when you step outside and close the door. Something older settled over the field. Rowan Ashfeld's chin dropped. He did not appear to notice he had done it. The alpha beside him did the same. Then the next one. Then the next. And the next. Moving through the field like a slow wave, unhurried and unstoppable. And every wolf in that field dropped their chin to their chest without a word, without a command, without any force at all. Kalen Dravith was the last. He looked at Seraphina across the field, and what was on his face was not the expression of a man submitting to someone more powerful than himself. It was the expression of a man recognizing something he had walked past his entire life without seeing. He bowed. "See. Afterward," she asked to return to Ironvale. "You do not have to go back there," he said. "I know." She paused. "That is not why I am going." She returned for 3 days and walked the territory from one end to the other. On the second day, the 2 warring alphas sat down together for the first time in 2 months and found that the argument had become difficult to sustain. On the third day, wolves showed up voluntarily to rebuild the eastern fence. No one assigned them, no one asked. Seraphina stood in the place where the old well had been and watched the sun go down over the eastern woods and felt, for the first time in her life, like the ground beneath her feet was not something to stand on carefully, but something she was genuinely part of. Kalen found her there. He had traveled alone. He stood at a respectful distance, which for a man who had never in his life stood at a respectful distance from anything, was its own kind of statement. "I laughed at you," he said. "I know. I did not know what you were." "No one did." She looked at him. "But that is not really the part that mattered." He waited. "You laughed because I was small," she said. "You would have done it either way." He did not argue. He had spent 2 months becoming someone who did not argue with things that were true. "Yes," he said. The field was very still. Somewhere in the eastern trees, the bird that had started singing 5 days ago was still at it, unhurried and unconcerned. "What do you want?" he asked. Not "what do you need?" Not "what can I offer?" What do you want? No one had ever asked her that. She thought about it for a long time. In the serious way she thought about things that deserved to be taken seriously. "To not have to earn the right to take up space," she said finally. He was quiet for a moment. The bird kept singing. "Then do not," he said. And for the first time in 23 years, Seraphina Voss stood in a field and took up exactly as much space as she needed, and the ground beneath her held steady, and the territory around her breathed, and nothing in the world that evening required her to be anything less than what she was.